A black single father trapped in a snowstorm, a remote cabin with only one bed, and the woman lying next to him was the coldest CEO in the company, the one who had made his life hell for years. While his 12-year-old daughter performed the most important concert of her life hundreds of miles away, Randy Thompson had no choice but to spend the entire night beside the most powerful woman he knew. No escape, no distance, no boundaries, and no one could have predicted that one night would change everything. Before we continue, let us know in the comment section where in the world you're tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories reach, and if this story speaks to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The night before everything fell apart, Randy Thompson sat on his worn leather sofa with his daughter's head resting on his lap. Sophie's fingers moved through the air, pressing invisible strings, rehearsing the piece she had practiced for months. "I'm going to play Salut d'amour, Dad," she said, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. "Mom's favorite." Randy stroked her braids gently. 5 years since cancer took his wife, and Sophie still remembered. Still held on to the violin like it was the last piece of her mother she could touch. "You're going to be amazing," he said. Sophie sat up and turned to face him. At 12 years old, she had her mother's eyes, deep brown, too wise for her age. "You'll be there, right? Front row?" "Front row," Randy confirmed. "I already requested the day off." "You promise?" The question landed harder than it should have. Randy knew why she asked. The school play he missed last spring. The parent-teacher conference he had to leave halfway through. The birthday dinner that turned into a phone call from the office parking lot. He took her hands in his. "I promise, baby girl. Nothing is going to stop me from watching you perform." Sophie studied his face for a moment, searching for something. Then she smiled. Not the bright, full smile she used to have, but something softer, more guarded. "Okay, Dad." She leaned back against him, and Randy held her close, breathing in the scent of her coconut shampoo. Tomorrow, he would finish his reports early. The day after, he would sit in that auditorium and watch his daughter play her mother's favorite song. Everything else could wait. The email arrived at 7:43 the next morning. Randy read it twice, hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something different. They didn't. The Henderson meeting, originally scheduled for next week, had been moved up, to Denver, to the same day as Sophie's concert. His stomach dropped. He walked to Ellie Sterling's corner office with his heart pounding against his ribs. Through the glass walls, he could see her behind her desk, platinum blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, reading something on her screen with the same expression she always wore. Controlled, calculating, cold. They called her the Ice Queen. In 3 years at the company, Randy had never seen her smile, never heard her ask about anyone's weekend or family or life outside these walls. To Ellie Sterling, employees were numbers on a spreadsheet. Either you produced results or you disappeared. He knocked on the glass door. "Come in." Randy stepped inside. The office smelled like expensive perfume and freshly printed paper. Ellie didn't look up from her screen. "Ms. Sterling, I need to discuss the Henderson meeting." "What about it?" "The original date worked with my schedule, but this new date—" He took a breath. "My daughter has a concert, her first solo performance. I've already committed to being there." Ellie finally raised her eyes. They were pale gray, almost silver, and completely devoid of warmth. "Mr. Thompson, I didn't hire you to hear about your child's extracurricular schedule. I hired you to work." "I understand that. But this concert is a school event," she cut him off. "There will be others. The Henderson account is worth $14 million. There will not be another chance if we lose them." Randy felt the familiar heat rising in his chest. The same heat he'd learned to swallow down every time someone questioned his dedication. Every time he had to work twice as hard to get half the recognition. Every time a colleague with less experience got promoted over him because he seemed distracted or wasn't fully committed. "I haven't taken a single day off in 3 years," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I've hit every target, exceeded every quota. I'm asking for 1 day." Ellie leaned back in her chair. "And that's exactly why you're still sitting in this building, Mr. Thompson. Don't turn your track record into a reason you have to leave." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. In this economy, with a daughter to feed and bills to pay, Randy couldn't afford to call her bluff. "The meeting is at 2 p.m. Denver time," Ellie continued, turning back to her screen. "I'll see you at the airport tomorrow morning. That will be all." Randy stood there for a moment longer, fists clenched at his sides. Then he turned and walked out without another word. He made the call from the stairwell where no one could see him. Sophie answered on the second ring. "Dad? Aren't you at work?" "Hey, baby girl." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Listen, I need to tell you something." Silence on the other end. She already knew. He could feel it. "The company moved up a meeting," Randy said. "I have to fly to Denver tomorrow. I tried to get out of it, but—" "It's okay, Dad." The words were too quick, too practiced, like she had rehearsed them. "Sophie, really, I understand." Her voice was steady, controlled, the voice of a child who had learned not to expect too much. "Work is important." Randy pressed his palm against the cold concrete wall. "I'm going to fly back right after the meeting. I'll catch the first flight out. I might miss the beginning, but I'll be there for the second half, I promise. You don't have to. I want to. I need to see you perform." Another silence. Then, quietly, "Okay. I love you, Sophie. Love you too, Dad." She hung up before he could say anything else. Randy stared at his phone, at the home screen photo of Sophie grinning with her violin, taken 3 years ago when smiles still came easily. He had seen the look in her eyes too many times. That mixture of disappointment and resignation. The look that said she was tired of hoping. And the worst part was, she didn't even cry. She didn't argue or beg or throw a tantrum like other kids might. She just accepted it, like this was normal, like fathers breaking promises was simply how the world worked. Randy pressed his forehead against the wall and closed his eyes. The next morning, the airport was chaos. Holiday travelers rushed past with overstuffed bags and crying children, and Randy navigated through them with his small carry-on and a weight in his chest that wouldn't lift. He spotted Ellie Sterling at the gate, charcoal suit, leather briefcase, reading a report like the noise around her didn't exist. She sat alone, an invisible barrier keeping the nearest passengers at least 3 seats away. Randy found a spot several rows behind her. He pulled out his phone and stared at the last message from Sophie. "Good luck at your meeting, Dad. No complaint. No guilt trip. Just acceptance." He typed out a response. "I'll make it to your concert. I promise." Then he deleted it. He had already made that promise. Making it again felt hollow. The boarding announcement crackled through the speakers. Randy watched Ellie Sterling stand, smooth her jacket, and walk toward the gate without glancing at anyone around her. He wondered what it was like to move through the world so untouched. No guilt pulling at your sleeves. No little girl waiting at home, practicing her mother's favorite song alone in an empty apartment. Must be nice, he thought bitterly. As he joined the boarding line, his phone buzzed. A photo from Sophie's grandmother. Sophie in her white concert dress, holding her violin, a nervous smile on her face. "She's been practicing all morning," the text read. "She's going to do great." Randy saved the photo and tucked his phone away. 24 hours. He just had to get through this meeting and get back home. 24 hours, and everything would be fine. He didn't know then that fate had other plans, that somewhere over the Midwest, a snowstorm was building, and his life was about to change in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. The Henderson meeting lasted 2 hours and 14 minutes. Randy delivered his presentation flawlessly, answered every question, and watched Ellie Sterling shake hands with the clients while they praised the company's vision. $14 million secured with a signature and a smile, or what passed for a smile on Ellie's face. As the clients filed out, Randy checked his phone. 3:47 p.m. Denver time. The concert started at 6 back home. If he could catch the 5 o'clock flight, he might land by 8, too late for the performance, but maybe he could be there for the aftermath, to hug Sophie, to tell her he was proud, to prove that he tried. He was already pulling up the airline app when Ellie's voice cut through his thoughts. The 5 o'clock flight is canceled. Randy looked up. Ellie stood by the conference room window, staring at her own phone, her expression unreadable. What? Check the weather. She turned the screen toward him. A mass of white and blue swirled across the radar map, covering everything between Denver and the East Coast. Snowstorm. They're grounding all flights until tomorrow at the earliest. The phone nearly slipped from Randy's hand. That can't be right. There has to be something. A different airline, a connecting flight. I've already checked. Everything is canceled. Ellie slipped her phone back into her briefcase. I've arranged alternative accommodation. A cabin about 40 minutes from here. It's the only available option that isn't a gymnasium floor at the airport. Randy barely heard her. He was scrolling through every airline app, every booking site, searching for anything that could get him home. But every search returned the same result. Canceled, canceled, canceled. Mr. Thompson? He looked up, desperation clawing at his chest. Ellie's gray eyes held something he couldn't identify. There's nothing you can do. The storm is already here. As if to prove her point, snow began falling outside the window. Thick, heavy flakes that blurred the city skyline into a wall of white. The cabin sat at the end of a winding road surrounded by pine trees bowed under the weight of fresh snow. It was small, painfully small, with weathered wooden walls and a single window that rattled with each gust of wind. Inside, Randy counted the essentials. A fireplace with a stack of logs beside it, a small table with 2 chairs, a kitchenette with running water, and 1 bed. A queen-sized bed with a faded quilt, positioned against the far wall like an accusation. Ellie surveyed the space with the same clinical detachment she brought to quarterly reports. It's not ideal, but it has heat and walls. That's more than most people will have tonight. Randy couldn't bring himself to respond. He stood by the window, watching the snow fall harder, his phone pressed against his palm like a lifeline. 6:15. The concert had started. He imagined Sophie backstage, smoothing her white dress, checking her violin one last time. He imagined her looking toward the door, waiting for him to walk through, hoping. His phone buzzed, a text from Sophie's grandmother. She's about to go on. She keeps looking at the door. Randy's throat tightened. He typed back, "Tell her I love her. Tell her I'm sorry." The response came seconds later. "I will. She'll understand, Randy. She always does. That was the problem. She always did." At 6:42, Randy's phone rang. He answered before the first ring finished. "Dad?" Sophie's voice was small, breathless. Behind her, he could hear the murmur of an audience. "Hey, baby girl, are you about to go on?" "In like 2 minutes." A shaky exhale. "I'm really nervous." "Don't be. You've practiced this piece 100 times. You know it by heart." "I know, but—" Her voice dropped. "I wish you were here." Randy closed his eyes. The words hit him like a physical blow. "I know, sweetheart. I wish I was there too. The storm." "I know. Grandma told me." Sophie's tone shifted, becoming that too steady voice he hated hearing from a 12-year-old. "It's okay. I understand. Sophie, listen to me. I want you to play that song like Mom is right there in the front row. Can you do that?" A soft sniffle. "Yeah. I am so proud of you. No matter what happens tonight, I am proud of the person you're becoming. Your mom would be too. Thanks, Dad. Her voice cracked slightly. I have to go. They're calling me. Go show them what you've got. I love you. Love you too. The call ended. Randy stared at the blank screen, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. Behind him, Ellie stood completely still. She had heard everything. He knew she had. The cabin was too small for secrets. He expected her to say something dismissive, to remind him that business was business, that sacrifices were necessary, that children were resilient. Instead, she said nothing. When Randy finally turned around, he saw something flicker across her face, something that looked almost like recognition, like she was seeing him for the first time. Then it was gone, replaced by her usual mask of control. The fire is dying, she said quietly. I'll add more wood. The hours crawled by like wounded animals. Randy sat on the wooden chair by the window, staring out at the snow that showed no signs of stopping. Ellie had claimed the bed, though she wasn't sleeping. She sat propped against the headboard, reading something on her tablet, the blue light casting sharp shadows across her face. Neither of them spoke. At some point, the silence became unbearable. Randy stood and walked to the fireplace, poking at the embers even though they didn't need it. Do you have children, Miss Sterling? The question came out before he could stop it. He regretted it immediately. It was too personal, too invasive, the kind of question you didn't ask the Ice Queen. But Ellie didn't freeze him out. She lowered her tablet and looked at the fire. No. Never wanted them? A long silence. Then, I wanted them once. A long time ago. Randy waited. He didn't expect her to continue, but something about the snow and the darkness and the enforced intimacy of the cabin seemed to loosen the walls she kept so carefully constructed. I was 25, Ellie said, engaged to a man who wanted a family more than anything. He was kind, genuinely kind, the type who coaches Little League and remembers every anniversary. She pulled the blanket higher on her lap, her eyes still fixed on the flames. But I had just been promoted. My first major leadership role. I knew if I took time off for a wedding, for children, I would lose momentum. In this industry, you don't get second chances. A bitter smile crossed her lips. He said I was cold, that I didn't have a heart. Maybe he was right. Randy leaned against the mantel. What happened to him? He married someone else, has 3 kids now, lives in Connecticut. I saw the Christmas card last year. Ellie's voice was matter-of-fact, but something underneath it trembled. He looked happy. Do you regret it? The question hung in the air between them. I don't allow myself to regret, Ellie said finally. If I did, I wouldn't be able to get out of bed in the morning. Randy understood that more than he wanted to admit. The regrets he carried, every missed recital, every broken promise, every time he chose the job over his daughter, they lived in his chest like stones. Some days they were so heavy he could barely breathe. At 30, I had another chance, Ellie continued. A pregnancy, unplanned, unexpected. Her jaw tightened. It was the same year I was offered the CEO position. Randy felt his breath catch. I made my choice, she said. And I've lived with it for 15 years. The fire crackled. Snow hissed against the window. In the silence, Randy saw Ellie Sterling not as the Ice Queen, not as the heartless boss who had ruined his week and possibly his relationship with his daughter, but as a woman who had sacrificed everything and wasn't sure it was worth it. I'm sorry, he said. He meant it. Ellie looked at him then, her gray eyes reflecting the firelight. Don't be. I made my choices, just like you make yours. She tilted her head slightly. Tell me about your wife. The request surprised him, but turnabout was fair play, and the night was long. Randy moved to the other chair, closer to the fire. Rachel. Her name was Rachel. We met in college. She was studying music education. I was studying finance. Complete opposites. A small smile tugged at his mouth. She used to say I was too serious, that I needed to learn how to breathe. She sounds lovely. She was. The smile faded. When she got sick, everything changed. Sophie was 7. Rachel made me promise 2 things. Raise Sophie to be kind, and never let her give up the violin. The violin was Rachel's? Randy nodded. She played in a community orchestra. Nothing professional, but she loved it. Said music was how she processed the world. He stared at his hands. Sophie has her talent, her passion. Sometimes when I hear her practice, it's like Rachel is still here. Ellie was quiet for a moment. That must be beautiful and devastating in equal measure. It is. More silence. But it was different now. Softer, less hostile. 2 people sitting with their wounds exposed, too tired to pretend they weren't bleeding. Being a black man in corporate America, Randy said slowly, you learn early that you have to work twice as hard for half the recognition. You can't show weakness, can't ask for help, can't let anyone see you struggle. Ellie listened without interrupting. I thought if I just worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, I could build something for Sophie. A life where she wouldn't have to fight as hard as I did. He let out a heavy breath. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being a father and became just a provider. A paycheck that comes home too late and leaves too early. You're being too hard on yourself. Am I? Randy shook his head. Tonight my daughter played the most important concert of her life and I wasn't there. Again. At some point, I understand, stops being forgiveness and starts being surrender. Ellie uncrossed her legs and leaned forward slightly. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for. She's 12. She shouldn't have to be resilient. Randy's voice cracked. She should get to be a kid who knows her dad will show up every time, no exceptions. The cabin fell silent again. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows in their frames. Ellie rose from the bed and walked to the small kitchenette. She found 2 mugs and filled them with water, heating them over the small gas burner. I don't have tea, she said, but warm water is better than nothing. She handed him a mug. Their fingers brushed briefly. Her skin was cold. Thank you, Randy said. Ellie returned to the bed but didn't lie down. She sat on the edge, facing him. I used to play piano, she said. When I was Sophie's age, my mother made me practice 2 hours every day. Did you love it? I hated it. A ghost of a smile. But I was good at it. My teacher said I could have gone to conservatory if I'd kept at it. Why didn't you? Because being good at something isn't the same as loving it. And I loved winning more than I loved music. She wrapped her hands around her mug. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd made different choices. If I'd been brave enough to want something other than success. Randy studied her face in the firelight. The sharp angles seemed softer now. The coldness melted into something more human. It's not too late, he said. Ellie shook her head. It is for some things, children, family, the life I could have had. She met his eyes. But maybe it's not too late for other things. The fire had burned down to glowing embers. Ellie rose and retrieved an extra blanket from the closet, draping it over Randy's shoulders. The gesture was small, wordless, but it said more than any speech could have. Randy looked up at her. I can sleep on the floor. You don't have to. The floor is freezing and that chair will destroy your back. Ellie's tone was brisk, but not unkind. The bed is large enough for 2 adults to share without impropriety. She walked back to the bed and slipped under the covers, positioning herself on the far edge. Randy hesitated. This was his boss, the woman who had forced him to miss his daughter's concert, the ice queen who had made his professional life miserable for years. But she was also a woman who had just shown him her scars, and he was too exhausted to keep fighting. He moved to the bed and lay down on top of the quilt, keeping a careful distance between them. The mattress was softer than the chair, and his body ached with gratitude. They lay in darkness, staring at the ceiling, listening to the storm rage outside. Randy's phone buzzed. He fumbled for it, heart racing. A text from Sophie's grandmother. She did beautifully, standing ovation. But she cried after she came off stage. She kept asking where you were. The words blurred. Randy pressed the phone against his chest, feeling the tears slide down his temples and into his hair. He tried to be quiet, tried to swallow the grief. But in the darkness, there was nowhere to hide. A hand found his wrist. Ellie's fingers wrapped around it gently, not gripping, just resting there. "You're not a bad father," she said softly. "You're a man trying to survive in a world that never gives you enough. Enough time, enough grace, enough room to be human." Randy couldn't speak. He just lay there, tears flowing freely now, feeling the warmth of her hand on his skin. "I'm sorry," Ellie whispered. "For the meeting, for the timing, for all of it. I didn't know." She stopped. "No, that's not true. I didn't want to know. It was easier not to see." Randy turned his head toward her. In the dim light from the dying embers, he could see the outline of her profile, the slight tremble in her jaw. "I see you now," she said. "I see what it cost you to be here." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Randy placed his hand over hers, pressing it more firmly against his wrist. "Thank you," he said. His voice was hoarse, broken. "For seeing." They lay like that as the storm continued to rage, two strangers who had become something else in the span of a single night. Not lovers, not even friends, just two people who had finally allowed themselves to be seen. And in that small cabin, buried in snow, something shifted, something healed, something changed. Morning light cut through the cabin window like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world buried in white silence. Randy opened his eyes slowly. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then he felt the unfamiliar mattress beneath him, saw the wooden beams above, and remembered everything. Ellie was already awake, standing by the window with her back to him. She had changed into fresh clothes from her carry-on, her platinum hair pulled back into its usual severe bun. The woman from last night, the one who had shared her regrets, who had held his wrist in the darkness, seemed to have vanished with the storm. "The roads are being cleared," she said without turning around. "I've arranged for a car to take us to the airport. There's a flight leaving at noon." Randy sat up, his body stiff from the unfamiliar bed. "Thank you." Ellie finally turned. Her gray eyes met his, and for a brief moment, something passed between them, an acknowledgement of what had happened in the darkness. Then her professional mask slid back into place. "I'll wait outside," she said. "Take whatever time you need." She walked out without another word, leaving Randy alone with the dying embers and the weight of everything that had changed. The flight home felt endless. Randy stared out the window at the clouds below, his mind already racing ahead to the conversation he would have to face. Sophie's grandmother had texted that morning. "She's been quiet, hasn't touched her violin since the concert." Those words haunted him more than anything else. When the taxi finally pulled up to his apartment building, Randy felt his heart hammering against his ribs. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. The door was unlocked. Inside, Sophie sat on the worn leather sofa, the same spot where she had rested her head in his lap just 2 nights ago. Her violin case lay beside her, unopened. She was still wearing her white concert dress, now wrinkled from sleep. She didn't run to greet him. She didn't even stand up. "Hey, baby girl," Randy said softly, closing the door behind him. Sophie looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, puffy. "Hey, Dad." He crossed the room and sat down beside her, leaving a small gap between them. "Are you angry with me?" Sophie shook her head slowly. "I'm not angry." "Then what?" She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "I'm just sad." The simplicity of the words broke something inside Randy. Not angry, sad. Anger he could have fought against, apologized for, made promises to fix. But sadness was different. Sadness was the quiet acceptance of disappointment. Sadness was what happened when a child stopped expecting things to be different. "I'm sorry," Randy said. His voice cracked. "I'm so sorry, Sophie. I should have been there. I should have found a way." "You always say that?" "I know." He turned to face her fully, tears already blurring his vision. "And I know my words don't mean much anymore. But I need you to understand something." Sophie looked at him, waiting. "When your mom got sick," Randy continued, "she made me promise to take care of you, to give you everything you needed. I thought that meant working hard, making money, building a future for you." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "But I was wrong. What you needed was me, just me. And I wasn't there." The tears came then, streaming down his face in a way he hadn't allowed himself to cry in years. Not at Rachel's funeral, not in the months of grief that followed. He had always been the strong one, the rock, the father who held everything together, but he couldn't hold it together anymore. "Dad?" Sophie's voice was small, uncertain. Randy pulled her into his arms, sobbing into her braids. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." For a long moment, Sophie was stiff in his embrace. Then her arms came up around his back, and she held him the way he had held her so many times before. "It's okay, Dad," she whispered. "You can cry. Mom always said crying doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human." Randy held his daughter tighter, feeling the truth of Rachel's words through their child. Sophie was comforting him. This 12-year-old girl who had every right to be angry, to push him away, was instead offering him grace. He didn't deserve it, but he would spend the rest of his life trying to. 1 week later, Ellie Sterling called Randy into the conference room. He walked in expecting the worst, a formal reprimand, a demotion, maybe even termination for his emotional display in Denver. Instead, he found Ellie standing alone by the window, holding a small envelope. "Close the door," she said. Randy obeyed, his guard up. Ellie turned to face him. She looked different somehow. Not softer exactly, but less armored. The Ice Queen was still there, but cracks had appeared in the facade. "I made some calls this week," she said. "To your daughter's school." Randy frowned. "Why?" "Because I learned that Sophie's performance earned her an invitation to the National Youth Music Festival next month." Ellie held out the envelope. "These are plane tickets, for both of you." Randy took the envelope, too stunned to speak. "I also wanted to tell you," Ellie continued, "that I'm implementing some changes to company policy, flexible scheduling for single parents, remote work options for employees with caregiving responsibilities." She straightened her shoulders. "It's long overdue." Randy stared at her. "Why are you doing this?" Ellie walked to the window, gazing out at the city skyline. "That night in the cabin, I told you I don't allow myself to regret, but the truth is, I've spent 15 years running from my choices, burying them under work and success and the belief that sacrifice was the only path." She turned back to face him. "I can't undo what I gave up, the family I didn't have, the life I didn't choose. But I can make sure other people don't have to make the same sacrifices I did." Randy felt a lump forming in his throat. "You're not as cold as you think you are." A small smile crossed Ellie's face, the first genuine smile he had ever seen from her. "Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation to maintain." 1 month later, Randy sat in the front row of the National Youth Music Festival auditorium. The seat beside him was occupied by Ellie Sterling, dressed in a simple navy dress instead of her usual power suit. She had asked to come, hadn't explained why, and Randy hadn't pressed. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the audience, and then Sophie walked onto the stage. She looked so small under the bright lights, her white dress glowing against the darkness. But when she lifted her violin and placed it under her chin, something transformed. She wasn't a nervous 12-year-old anymore. She was a musician. The first notes of Salut d'amour filled the auditorium. Rachel's favorite song, played by Rachel's daughter, in front of the father who had finally learned to show up. Randy felt the tears sliding down his cheeks, but he didn't wipe them away. He let them fall, let himself feel everything he had spent years suppressing. Beside him, Ellie sat perfectly still. But when Randy glanced over, he saw her looking down at her own hands. Hands that had once played piano, that had once held the possibility of a different life. The song ended. The audience erupted in applause. Sophie took her bow, her face radiant with joy. Her eyes found Randy in the front row, and her smile grew even wider. After the performance, Sophie came running through the crowd and threw herself into her father's arms. "Dad, you came. You really came." "I promised," Randy said, holding her tight. "And this time, I meant it." Sophie pulled back and noticed Ellie standing nearby. "Who's this?" Ellie knelt down to Sophie's eye level. "I'm a friend of your father's, and I think you played beautifully tonight." Sophie beamed. "Thank you." The three of them walked out of the auditorium together into the cool evening air. Sophie held her father's hand, chattering excitedly about the performance, the other musicians, the possibility of doing this again next year. Randy caught Ellie's eye over his daughter's head. No words passed between them. None were needed. What they shared wasn't romance or attraction. It was something rarer, understanding, the recognition of two people who had finally allowed themselves to be seen. That night in the cabin, Randy had thought he'd lost everything, but looking at his daughter's smile, feeling the warmth of her hand in his, he realized the truth. Everything had changed, not because of scandal, not because of a shared bed, but because two strangers had finally been brave enough to see each other, truly see each other, in the darkest moment of their lives. And sometimes, that's all it takes to find your way home.